All right, guys, today we're going to read chapters 22 and 23. In the last stuff that we read, Lily was able to teach Albert how to swim, but then she had to tell him the truth about what she had said. She told him that she had lied about going to catch a troop ship, and Albert said, I lied too, and he's getting ready to tell her what the truth is about Ruth, his sister. Chapter 22. Lily walked down Cross Bay Boulevard. She'd been looking for the mailman all afternoon. Just then he rounded the corner. I have been waiting forever, she told him. It's too hot to walk fast, he said, but I have something for you. He pulled out a letter. Poppy, she said. She took it from him, smiling. She didn't even wait to open it. She leaned against the window of the as good as new shop to tear open the thin white envelope. Mr. Rowley, the owner, was moving things around. No more straw hat, and the violin was gone. Instead, he was dragging a huge moose head to the windowsill. Must be 1,000 years old, Lily thought, and it will be in the window for another 1,000. She looked down at Poppy's letter, ran her fingers over the handwriting she loved. He didn't say much about himself, but about the end of the summer, and Lily's going back to St. Albans. He asked about how many books she had written. She looked at the moose head. I've written about as much as you have, she said under her breath. But never mind, there'd be plenty of time for that when school began. She turned the page over. There was more about books. Poppy wrote about Madeline again, and A Tale of Two Cities. And remember the promise he had written. That's the key to it all. There was always something, Lily thought as she headed for home. And to me, when he says that's the key to it all, that makes me think that he's trying to give her information like in a code or something, and she's not figuring it out. There was always something, Lily thought as she headed for home. Before she went to the library, she'd have to find the Three Musketeers book. It wasn't easy. Bent almost double, she searched under the boardwalk for an hour. Up above, she could hear thunder, and once in a while she could see streaks of heat lightning in the distance. But at last she spotted the book. It was propped up against one of the posts, a little wrinkled, a little sandy, but she blew on the pages and went off to the library to ask the world's crabbiest librarian to find the promise for her. Mrs. Haley looked up as Lily laid the book on the desk in front of her. Ah, Lily, she said, smiling. I've been looking for you. I know I was crabby the other day. Lily began to shake her head, began to say no, but then she just smiled and rolled her eyes. They both laughed. I was hot and tired, and I didn't need one more story about a lost book, Mrs. Haley said. That's all right, Lily agreed. I found the book anyway. Another reason I'm glad you're here, Mrs. Haley said. I searched and searched. I even called the library in Jamaica. Your father really knows books, but this time he's wrong. There is no children's book called The Promise. I'll tell him, Lily said. She thought for a moment. How about A Tale of Two Cities? Lovely book. A little hard, but worth it. Mrs. Haley plucked it off the shelf in back of her and stamped it with the end of her pencil. Outside the window, there was a sudden flash of lightning and then a clap of thunder, so close they could feel the vibration. Mrs. Haley shivered. I'm glad it's closing time, and you should be home too. Lily waved her hand. No rush. Graham is sewing with her club. She left supper for me in the refrigerator. Mrs. Haley glanced out the window again. We're going to have a storm. Lily nodded. I'm on my way anyway. She tucked the book under her arm and was out the door and down the street, feeling the wind pushing her along. By the time she crossed to the other side of Cross Bay, it had begun to rain. The wind picked up papers and swirled them into doorways, and huge drops spattered the dust along the boulevard. Lily began to run, thinking about Albert. She had told 100 lies, 1,000 lies, but Albert had told only one. And it wasn't really a lie. All he had done was keep his eyes closed. She sighed. He had sat in the boat the other afternoon and closed his eyes to show her. I was afraid of the Nazis in France, he said, very afraid. Lily had backstroked the oars gently, keeping the boat away from the porches as he told her the rest of the story. The lady with the gray dress came with the people from the hospital, he said, and I closed my eyes. It wasn't that they were mean. Ruth was sleeping, and one of them said, Poor little girl. They took her in an ambulance. I knew if I opened my eyes, they would take me with them. I could have stayed with her. It's all right. Lily could see his hands clasped tight together and his knees clenched. He was shaking as if he were cold on that hot afternoon. I would have been afraid too, she said. I would have shut my eyes. I wanted to come to America, he told her. I wanted to be safe. I didn't even say goodbye. Oh, Albert, she had said, knowing how he felt. I left Ruth, he had begun again so quietly she had to lean forward to hear him. And Najee Mama said to stay together, to be a family. Lily had begun to talk then. She said everything she could think of, everything she thought Graham might have said. The war will be over, she told him, and Ruth will come, and maybe even Najimama. We'll all be in Rockaway together. Najimama is very old. I think maybe he stopped. Ruth has no family except me. She has no one special to watch out for her. Lily could see him looking toward the sea, the waves high, breakers crashing onto the beach. He shivered. The lady leaned over. I felt her putting something into my coat pocket. It's Ruth's address. I will show you someday. He shook his head. What good is it? I cannot write to her. I have to go back and get her somehow. You can't go back, Lily said. You can see the water. It would never work. It's my fault. I shouldn't have. She bit her lip. It was my lie. I want to tell you something, Lily, he said. I was so angry, so sad when I left Hungary. I told Najimama I would be angry and sad forever. Lily looked up. It was hard to see his face because her own tears were blinding her. Do you know what Najimama said? He asked. She said I would be happy someday. She said I'd have a friend, a good friend. It's almost as if she knew about you. We'll make a pact, she said. What is that? We won't lie. We'll be brave. Yes, he said, but not so brave to try for the ship. Promise? Now in the pouring rain, Lily was reminded of her father. She reached the house and pulled open the kitchen door, thinking she was going to write and ask him about the book, The Promise. There was another tremendous streak of lightning then. It lit up the porch and the whole of the sky, and she could see in the distance a rowboat at the edge of the bay, about to cross through the edge of the marshes. It was Albert. This is chapter 23. Lily couldn't see light in any of the houses along the row, not even glimpses from the edges of the blackout curtains. Everyone was gone, it seemed. Graham wouldn't be home for an hour, and the Orbans were probably shopping, caught somewhere in the rain. A moment later, she slid down the ramp into the rowboat and began to row toward the marshes. Another bolt of lightning hit the bay, and beneath the seat in the stern, she could see something almost hidden against the anchor. It was Paprika, small and wet, shivering and terrified. There was no time to take her back, no time to dry her off. She'd have to stay there huddled under the seat until later, until Lily persuaded Albert to come back. He hadn't promised he wouldn't try it, but she thought she'd convinced him. How could he have thought he could do it alone, she thought, in a storm like this? The bay was rough with whitecaps, and the rain, pelting the water, slanted toward her, pushed by the wind. She was soaked through, her hair hanging in strings, dye from her shorts running blue over her legs. A puddle of water was gathering in the bottom of the boat. She knew she should scoop it out with the old coffee can they kept for bailing, but there wasn't time for that either. She kept her eyes focused on the marshes so the lightning would show her how far Albert had gone. She was lucky he was a poor rower. Unlucky that in the center of the bay the waves were beginning to rise so high that the boat dropped steeply at times and the oars didn't hit the water with every stroke. She couldn't stop thinking of Poppy telling her that someday the war would be over and everything would be the same. She couldn't imagine it, and she didn't even know where Poppy was. That last night in the boat he had promised her he'd let her know. Promised. Something tugged at her mind, and then it was gone. She was across the bay, past the marshes she couldn't see, and across the channel. The pull of the sea was much stronger now, and as she looked back, she couldn't see the entrance to the bay anymore, even though she was just a few strokes away. For a moment, she could see the misty beams of the tall lights on the boardwalk, then they were hidden again as the rowboat slid into the trough of a wave. Then, above the sound of the rain and the waves, Lily heard another sound, the sound of a motor. A small boat, she thought, a fishing boat or maybe a cutter, and nearby. The sound was comforting. She didn't feel so alone, even though she couldn't see it. And just ahead of her was Albert. He had heard the sound too. In the next lightning flash, she could see him turn, looking over his shoulder. Wait, she called. It's not a ship, not a troop ship. Don't, Albert. He couldn't hear her, but in another flash he saw her, she was sure. And the rest of it seemed to be in slow motion. The next wave was so swollen, so tremendously high that it pulled his boat up, and the boat poised there on the crest for an instant, motionless. She could see him clearly, the orange of his life jacket standing out even in the darkness. Then as the waves slid out from under the boat, she could see the forward part rising, almost straight up. Lily watched it breathless as it slid back, and in that second, Albert was tossed into the sea. She could see the orange life jacket a little longer, but after only seconds, a wave pulled her boat in one direction and Albert in another, and he disappeared. She kept calling, kept trying to turn the boat in circles, glancing at the lights on the boardwalk to mark her place, watching for the streaks of lightning to show her where he was. She veered away from his empty boat, which was spinning first high on a wave, then into the crest. In another flash, she saw him again, just the quickest glimpse, the orange life jacket and his dark head above the water. "I'm here," she yelled, not sure he had heard her or even seen her, and then another wave came, a mountain of a swell that moved toward them, pushing Albert toward her. Lily could see him turning toward her, his mouth open. He was gulping water, and she reached out, and by some miracle her hand hooked around the top of the jacket. She held it, feeling her nails rip, but knowing she couldn't let go, even if she was pulled out of the boat. But the wave was past them now, and the water grew calm just for the second he needed to grip the boat, and she pulled at his jacket with both hands until he tumbled in. He lay there in the bottom, the water washing over him, taking deep breaths. "You promised," she wanted to say, even though she knew he hadn't. But she knew it was her fault. All her fault because of her lies, and she told herself she would never tell another lie if she could just get him back safely. And now Albert was up on the seat, briefly raising one shoulder in the air, coughing and reaching out to touch her hand. Lily turned the boat back into the bay, rowing toward the houses, watching him trembling with the cold. Finally, she nosed the boat in under the porch, the lights on above and Graham waiting, and watched as Paprika, a furious ball of orange fur, streaked out of the boat and up the path away from them.